Okay, part 2 of chapter 17. I'm trying to do this in smaller bites so they upload quicker. So we're moving on now to think about the encounters section of your chapter. So the chapters, as you'll notice, the theory is at the front, and then the specific examples that relate to the theory is in the second part. So Sin as I seem to be completely unable to get this in under 15 minutes, I will try and break at that point and try to make this second part shorter, because you don't need my full explanation for the individual examples. It's the theory that I'm trying to emphasize more. So in all world history textbooks, it's really important to understand that we can't be exhaustive. There's no way you can talk about everything all the time, and all the people. And, talking about people, we have these huge global trends going on. And at the same time, there are individuals operating within that. And one of the things that we find increasingly in the late agrarian era is this projection of individualism, that these images of individuals really grasp and run with the idea of individualism. And this is really quite new, and these individuals that are lauded are not just kings or famous warriors, but a whole range of people. And this is something that people are starting to appreciate a little bit more in this society. And if you think about this a little deeper, you also see in this period religious schisms. And so maybe the relationship between the individual in society and their own individual religious choices is a little, the two are entwined. So heroic individuals can also be free-thinking religious people as well. And we see several examples of this in this period, such as Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation, but also in China, Wang Yangming, who is a Neo-Confucian scholar and official, whose ideas led to a schism in China. Other schisms, other religious differences are a little more they're involving more the sort of encounter, the cross-cultural encounters, whereas many religious schisms are subcultural encounters. An example of this would be the Jesuits, as they go out into China and into Japan, trying to do missionary work, trying to convert, because they are running up against existing religious and political frameworks to which their new ideas can be very disruptive. We talked last week about how the Tokugawa Shoguns had come to power after a period of 150-year period of civil war, and so they were very keen to keep control. And the Jesuits that came threatened to disrupt this. When it comes to cross-cultural encounters, there's some positive aspects and some negative aspects, but they're always reflect more on those that are doing the interpreting than those that are being interpreted. That those people who are doing the looking, it's very often that they're looking into a mirror, not truly looking at the other in their own terms. So they see reflections of themselves, how the other is not like them, or how the other is like them, rather than truly looking at what they're like. And so one of the ideas or myths that come out of this period is the idea of the noble savage, that the peoples the peoples that are newly encountered are in some ways innocents, but they're also perhaps a resource to be exploited. As we said a little earlier, another development from cross-cultural contacts can be syncretism. Very often when a small group becomes the conquerors and moves into a new place, as we've seen perhaps with the Mongols, the small group becomes acculturated to the larger group, so they become more like the larger group. If there's a big power differential, sometimes, however, syncretism can take place, that the culture of the people coming in and the culture of the colonized can blend, as in this picture of the Virgin of Guadalupe. This is a great example of this blended cross-cultural knowledge. This is a map made by a Jesuit, Matteo Ricci, who worked at the Ming court in China for a while before things got uncomfortable, shall we say, for Jesuits. And what Matteo Ricci is able to do is to bring his knowledge of geography and combine it with Chinese knowledge of geography and produce this syncretized world map. So this is really networked knowledge, this bringing together of this knowledge. And you'll see this is his map, but it has the Chinese characters because it's written for the Ming court. So in some way this is an elite connection. Matteo Ricci, seen here dressed as in the robes of a traditional Chinese scholar, and as a Jesuit priest. Jesuits are always very interested in knowledge and education. That's their caritas. And so the Jesuit priests and Confucian scholars, as elites, and we said that elites of societies sometimes have more in common than the elites have with their own people, they could understand each other very well. They operated with similar cultural frames and cultural screens, even across such a great divide. But then we also get in this period the development of new divides and the development of racial theory, which comes out of slavery. Slaves in the past, where it was a status, it wasn't necessarily a colour to do with the colour of the skin. So the word Slav comes, slave comes from the word Slavs, meaning the people, the Slavic people. Those were a big body of slaves, and so it's come in and influenced the language like that. In Old English, the word is actually very similar to the word for Welsh. So there is an identifier with a group of people, but it's not a colour of people. So what you're looking at here is, I think, a rather smart graphic that shows you how race and slavery are constructed in the American South, in the British colonies of the American South of North America. So this is the economic reality. Oh, sorry. There we go. This is the economic reality, that there are, white rich landowners, and the poorer people underneath them are the slaves, landless African workers, both slaves and indentured, and the landless European white workers, also many of whom are indentured. And indentured means that they are they owe their employer a certain amount of money, and they have to work a certain amount of years to pay this off, and it's usually quite a lot of years, 15 years, for example. So this is the sort of economic reality. But the cultural frame that has been constructed by the elite shows a very distinct social reality that doesn't actually exist like this. This is a construction of race, whereby the elite top is white, and underneath that there's the non-elite whites and the blacks underneath. So these are different, as you can see, and this is more of an economic reality, and this is a social construction of race. Okay, so finally, let's move on to talk very briefly about the scientific revolution. Um, the scientific revolution, I really don't, I don't like that term very much. It makes it sound a little too much like it's switching on a light, that everybody had been living in this dark ages, and all of a sudden the modern period dawns and switched on the light and everybody could see for the first time. But this was actually another product of this fully mature late agrarian world, and it had been building for centuries. And global network flows are indeed key to this development as well. And we see four external factors that influenced the Europeans in this period, particularly as they sort of gear up for this so-called scientific revolution. The first is a revival of Greek learning. And if we think about global events at this point in time, Constantinople, which is the last sort of bastion of the Byzantine Empire, falls in 1453. So all those very, very smart people with an unbroken heritage, back to the Greek and Roman world, and just bear with me a second. Okay, the Byzantines, with this unbroken record back to the Greek and Roman world, the last of them in the great city of Constantinople, which falls in 1453. Those last ones are moving north, and before that there's an influx even earlier than this. And also at the same time in Spain, there's this great flowering of intellectual culture in Spain, which is Islamic, but has Jewish and Christian elements, and that isn't sort of eradicated, pushed out of Spain until 1492. So we have these two, from Byzantine and from Islamic Spain, we have these two ways that ancient Greek knowledge is filtering into Europe. Okay, so the rediscovery isn't just some sort of wake up and smartening of Northern Europeans. It has these two streams which are very much tied into global networks. Secondly, as we've said, one of the cultural frame values of Europeans is its legal system. And if we think about the way that people like Newton conceived of science, they talk about laws of nature. So there's this kind of way of thinking about it being very legalistic, that it has to be this way. And thirdly, merchants. Merchants measure things. This is what they do. Their activity requires measurement and quantification and calculation and decision making. All these things play into the so-called scientific revolution, and they're a part of this growing, maturing late agrarian world. And lastly, as we talked about from week one, there's this increasing emphasis on innovation in Europe, as opposed to tradition in other parts of the world in the wake of the Black Death. So one of the things that develops is a model, a way of looking at things, and you'll read about René Descartes' deductive method and Francis Bacon's inductive method. Francis Bacon, remember, is also one of your readings for this week. And it's not just about the specifics of what you're investigating, but how you investigate, what your method is. And then the rest of the chapter talks about this talks about cosmology, Copernicus, Tycho Brahe, Galileo, and Isaac Newton. This last guy, Isaac Newton, I worked on quite a bit when I was in graduate school. He's a favourite of mine. He obviously wrote many excellent mathematics and physics principles, but he also wrote more on alchemy than he did on those. And he wrote almost twice as much on biblical prophecy than he did on science. So for Newton, science and religion were not two different things. They were intimately entwined. And this painting here by Blake shows God, the architect, with his set square there, setting the universe according to natural laws. So Newton was described as both the last of the great magicians and the first of the great scientists, and which is fun, but maybe maybe a little too absolute. As he said himself, if I've seen further than others, it's because I've stood on the shoulder of giants. So Newton himself appreciated the fact that there is no such thing as the scientific revolution. There's no light switching on. This is a long process of, these great scientific natural philosophers that he is building on. Okay. So Newton is one of the people that we're thinking about in the issues of doing world history. And the tension here is between understanding the past in its own terms and using the past to help us understand our world today. There is a famous saying about history: if you don't know your past, you're destined to repeat it. I don't know if history is that practically applicable. There's certainly, we need to know our past. We need to know what happened in the past. We need to take examples from the past, but individual circumstances are such that very often repetitious mistakes are made because we perceive of our circumstances differently in each case. Anyway, so it also talks about this we expect there to be a conflict between religion and science. The two things shouldn't coexist, and this is because of some of the modern problems with some Christian groups, for example, not believing in evolution, and that there's a division between how things work and why things work. Okay, so you can look at something like an optics and ask, well, why does light refract as a rainbow? And you can understand how light's made up of different, whatever it's made up of, different spectrums, and it's, that's how you see it. But why is a completely different question. Why are there rainbows? We can understand how a rainbow is made, but why are there rainbows? Why does the world work that way? That's sort of more of a religious question as far as we can see. And there are some very famous disputes between religion and scientists, for example, Galileo and Charles Darwin. But for the most part of human history, religion and science have gone hand in hand, that understanding more about the world is kind of also about understanding more about God. Okay. So where have we got to? We've done chapter 15 on networks. We've done chapter 16 on hierarchies. Today we're doing cultural frames and cultural screens. These all apply to the late agrarian world. Now we're going to move on to revolution. Firstly, in chapter 18, political revolutions across the Atlantic world, the French Revolution, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and then we're going to start looking at the Industrial Revolution too. Okay, thank you for your patience.